To see everybody, and I'm sorry we don't have enough chairs, but I think some are on their way. There are a few seats up here for those brave souls who will come up. And there's that ledge. But anyway, welcome. It's good to see this show of first, second, third, fourth years to our joint SMI&FV concentration meeting. And we're really happy, Jill and I are really happy to do a joint, we do joint meetings once in a while, because for several reasons. One is just to show you that we get along, and two, we actually live very close to each other, and two is that there is an overlap. There is a clear overlap between, you know, family violence and serious mental illness, you know, which hopefully this talk will be an example of. And so every once in a while we do these joint concentration meetings so that you can see that things do overlap. The other thing is, one of the things we've been requested by students is to have some forensic people come in, experts come in. And so we thought this would be a nice way to join the two concentrations by inviting Dr. Kara Klein to give a talk today about forensic work, which some of you may already do. I know some people do, and some of you may be interested in doing. And I thought, can I say how I know you? I've been working with Kara. She's a supervisee of mine, and I'm always fascinated by the cases that she brings to supervision because they're just fascinating and challenging in many ways. And so I thought she would be a great person to come and speak to us about this work. So let me tell you a little bit about Dr. Klein. She's a licensed psychologist in private practice. During her doctoral training, she focused on post-traumatic stress disorder, and after completing her doctorate at City University, she undertook a 2-year fellowship in forensic psychology at North Shore University Hospital. And during this training, she learned how to apply her clinical skills and expertise in trauma to work in the legal arena, focusing on serving the family and matrimonial courts. She's a certified mental health professional in New York City, Nassau, and Suffolk courts, and she has been appointed as a forensic psychologist in almost 200 cases, and has additionally consulted with attorneys and clients regarding psycholegal matters. She has been qualified as an expert witness in both the Supreme and family courts of the state of New York. And she's writing a book about her. You didn't put that there, but I want her to write a book about some of these.
Supervisee of Dr. Campbell forever.
So without further ado, we'll turn it over to Dr. Klein.
Thank you.
We have handouts for you at the end.
Yes, I did prepare a few handouts that you don't need to look at. They're just to take away. Thank you for having me here, and thank you for that lovely introduction. I couldn't have been better myself. Well, I titled my talk today, "Till Death Do Us Part: The Role of a Forensic Psychologist." The role of a forensic psychologist when love sours. So, first let me say, I became a psychologist because I wanted to help people. Or so I thought. Over time, I began to realize that, well, yeah, sure, I wanted to help people. What I really had was this burning desire to know what was truly under the surface. So for those of us who admit to having that burning desire, there is perhaps no more satisfying a subspecialty of psychology than forensic psychology, particularly in the prickly world of family law in which I work. Now, I'll spare you from the part of me that wishes I never peeked under the rug, the part of me that wishes I did not know what went on behind closed doors, in intimate whispers and hushed tones. The part of me that wishes I could see a couple that looks happy and in love, or have a surface interaction with a family online at the supermarket and think, well, it's nice. Because I know I never really know. Keeps me humble, at least. At first, it was all so clear. I was a rape crisis volunteer, feeling heroic years ago as I ran to the ER in the middle of the night to tell a victim, it's not your fault. Then I worked with women who were sexually abused as children, and then women and men who were sexually abused as children or sexually assaulted as adults, and then those who had a history of substance abuse to boot. And I felt so effective as I utilized empirically validated treatments to help the victims. I stayed far away from the offenders, neither treating nor studying them, and I allowed myself to enjoy the comradeship in the world of victim advocacy. I knew a lot back then. And so I decided to use all my knowledge to help those involved with the legal world. I'd learned how to be a forensic psychologist. That is, I'd learned how to apply my professional scientific knowledge to legal problems, family law problems specifically. And here's what I learned. Actually, let me tell you a story about one of my cases. It's somewhat typical for my caseload because of my background working with all sorts of family violence, and legally, just so you know, a couple, married or not, is dealt with in the family court, so they're considered family. I tend to have judges and attorneys ask me to evaluate people who have, or might not have had, that's why they're calling me, some sort of potential for abuse or violence. Are these children being abused or maltreated? Is this woman the victim of battery? Are there risks involved with allowing these children to spend significant time with their father? Does this mother need treatment before she should be alone with her children? Most of the time, the judges and lawyers just want to know what's going on here, beneath the surface. And who better than I to tell them? So, here goes the story. They were both students at a local university, each still living at home with parents, when they met at a club in Queens. Sue was pretty and petite, her shiny hair, the color of corn silk, flowing in long waves just beyond her shoulders. He liked the way she would listen, her face intent and unflustered. How exciting it was when she threw her head back in laughter after a drink and insisted he dance with her. Although it was not in his nature, being more the quiet and private type, he had, after all, allowed himself to be dragged out by his business school classmates, even though they should have been working on a project. But for now, well, this caring and intelligent woman made him want to join in the party. Sue liked that Ronnie was studious and motivated. In Ronnie, Sue saw the potential for a life of stability and focus. He encouraged her to finish her teaching degree, pushing her gently to stay in and study more often than she might have without him. His MBA required a lot of work, and they both had part-time jobs and were expected to contribute to their respective households, so there wasn't a lot of time for a college scene anyway. 2 or 3 times a week, he would spend the evenings at her nearby house and commute late at night back to his house in the Bronx. On the weekends, he would bring her up to his home, where she seemed to enjoy the ritual of eating Sunday meals with his large Italian extended family in the neighborhood. In comparison, her house was vacant, disorganized, and dirty if she didn't clean it. Her mother was a stern, controlling type when sober, but she spent most of her days lately smoking a seemingly endless cigarette while settling into just the right level of intoxication. Sue and Ron soon moved in together, taking an apartment near the school and her home, which allowed her to still help her mother keep the house up. Sue tried to also keep up with her friendships, especially with her 2 closest friends from high school. But she felt like Ronnie was always pressuring her to do something more useful than be with a friend. True, he had allowed her to quit her part-time job
to focus on her degree. But it seemed as if she wasn't studying, he expected her to be making dinner or cleaning the apartment all the time. If he came home from his job and found her with a book on an unmade bed, he'd throw a fit. Over time, Ronnie became increasingly insistent about accounting for her time, what she was doing, where she was, with whom. Back then, they joked that since he was going into finance, he was big on accounting. She kind of appreciated having a man who really cared about her, looking out for her all the time, having lost her own father years ago. It wasn't until later on that she realized she was trapped in a relationship with someone who was possessive and violent. The first time they fought, bad enough to make her really scared, she hid in the bathroom and called her high school girlfriend. The next day, when he went to work, her friend insisted on taking her to the hospital to check for internal injuries. There were none, and Sue refused to file a police report. After a few more rows like this one, she moved back in with her mother. His flowers and the sweet murmurings coaxed her back, however, and she welcomed the fresh smell of their sheets again, devoid of stale smoke. They graduated. He got a good job in the city. She worked as a teacher in a nearby public school. They were happy, except when they weren't. When they'd fight, when he'd choke her, when he'd push her, when he'd put her down, when he'd boss her around, when he'd shout so loud at her that she began to jump when she heard the front door open. They had their first child, a son, and they bought a house on Long Island. A few years later, when their second son was born with a congenital heart disease, they agreed that she would stop working so that she could take care of his many medical procedures and appointments. Living in the suburbs, Sue threw herself into the children's schools and activities and was active in the PTA. Ronnie, well, he remained the same studious man she'd first met, always working or sitting at the dining room table with bills and his computer and his files. Everything was always about the budget. He questioned her about every penny she spent. He said, the kids didn't need the latest video game. He said, their youngest son could wear the older one's hand-me-downs. He often took one of the boys or the other to work with him on Saturdays, and he'd come home early during baseball season to bring them to their games, which was nice. But most of what Ronnie did involved working or paying bills or telling Sue how to budget. Her stomach would be in knots when she saw him pull out the chair and spread out the household bills. She might be in one of the boys' rooms helping with homework, and she'd hear Ronnie's footsteps approaching. She'd tense as he sprung open the door. She'd try not to flinch too visibly in front of the kids as he yelled and screamed and carried on. Sue recalled, he would become a different person. His voice would change. It didn't sound like him. My kids would hear this voice, a loud voice, and said I always tried quickly to leave the room if my kids were there, because I didn't want them to witness anything. I'd go to my room hoping he would just go back to his paperwork. He'd follow me into the basement of my room, close the door, which I was glad about, so the kids wouldn't see. Ronnie would grab her arm or grab her by the neck, and he had long ago vowed never to leave visible marks. Behind closed doors, the arm twisting and pushing got more frequent, and the verbal abuse was a regular occurrence in front of the children, now 13 and 10 years old. She worried about their older son's safety as he became more determined to stick up for her. She tried to do things to make the marriage better, arranging for them to stay without the kids overnight in a hotel for their anniversary, even buying lingerie for the occasion. And there continued to be warm, loving moments. She kept thinking, if only make him happy, then the abuse would stop. The few family vacations were a disaster, with Ronnie trying to restrict their spending, taking work calls every 2 minutes, and finally leaving them to run back to the city for work. began to think there must be a life outside of this marriage. She was scared, though. Scared to be without his guidance and control. Yet, she reflected, even after her father died when she was 14, and her mother slipped into alcoholism, she survived. She could survive outside of Ronnie, too. She remained indecisive, however, until Ronnie exploded one night violently. It was about the bills, as usual. Sue had been in one of their son's rooms, checking one of their homework assignments on the computer, while the kids were in the other son's rooms playing with the Xbox. Suddenly, Ronnie burst into the room in rage. He spun her around in the computer chair and started screaming at her about how she had overspent on one of the department store credit cards. He kicked the chair back so hard that it hit the closet, the wall of which was adjacent to the other son's room. The bang must have alerted the kids, and they came running in just in time to see Ronnie lifting her off the seat by the throat, choking her, threatening to kill her. Sue said she would never forget the expression on their older son's face as he shielded the younger one from seeing the scene. His mouth hanging open, his face white. He didn't say anything, just ran back out of the room, pushing his younger brother out in front of him. Sue knew it was a turning point. She knew she had to take the kids and leave the marriage. For the next week, she secretly planned her escape, emptying out a safe deposit box, and moving some money out of a joint account in order to open up her own, from which she paid an attorney. Sue felt Ronnie's suspicions, and he suddenly found reasons to be home more often, to accompany her on every errand, even to the bank. Sue was petrified that Ronnie would kill her, as he had threatened, if she told him in person about the divorce. So she decided to tell him over the phone. She arranged to take the dog and the children over to her brother's house one day after school, and she called Ronnie. He was oddly calm. Then it was 3 hours before he showed up at her brother's house, begging to talk to her. Sue thought that maybe during those few hours he was moving money around into different accounts and removing cash and valuables out of the house. It was always first and foremost, she said, about the money. Before she'd called him, Sue had gone to the police to report this violent episode from the prior week. They in turn advised her to go to family court and obtain an order of protection for herself and the children. When Ronnie showed up at her brother's house, he was arrested. She and the dog and the children went back home, and she tried to reassure the kids that everything would be all right. She filed for divorce, and a few weeks later, cases were combined and transferred to the Integrated Domestic Violence Court in the Supreme Court. Supervised visitation and a forensic psychological evaluation were ordered. She breathed a little easier, hoping now that she was in the court system, they were safe. So I got the case. Sounds simple enough. Victim, perp, protect the children, recommend some treatment for the father. Okay. But, so she came in first, and I had the history, and I had the files with the police reports and the orders of protection, and she told me this story. Now, the father came in. Now, so what do you think he said to me? I think he just said, "Oh, God, I'm so sorry I ever laid my hands on her. Please, let me see my children." Or do you think he said, I'm so sorry I was a controlling ass. Now I see the light." Yeah? You don't think he said that? No. Not at all. In fact, he said, yeah, they fought that night. Yeah, they fought a lot. And he said he was angry a lot, and particularly on that night. Yes, he got in her face and yelled. Great. This should be an easy case. But then he said they hadn't fought over the bills. Not on that night, and not on the other nights. He said he yelled at her because she was pissed drunk and high on painkillers. That's right. He said their fights were about her alcoholism and substance abuse. All of their fights. including the one way back in their first apartment when her friend took her to the hospital. He said that Sue had poisoned herself from drinking too much, that she wouldn't listen to him, that he had left the apartment that night and planned to be through with the relationship, frustrated and worried about her. But her friend called him the next day and said she'd taken her to the hospital and she was starting treatment and she was joining AA. And Ronnie said Sue got sober for a long, long time. She stayed in AA, she spoke regularly to her sponsor, so they got back together, and they got married, and they had children, and they bought a house. Everything was going well. Until she herniated a disc while taking care of her mother, who was dying from cancer. And the doctor prescribed OxyContin. And she started drinking again. And they started fighting again. Ronnie recalled, towards the end, she was hiding the bottles behind the tables in the basement. I found them and yelled at her, "You're an alcoholic." Although he never discussed their mother's drinking with the children, he said, their younger son did ask what was wrong with Mom when he'd see her wobbling and stumbling around the house in the evenings. And he was pretty sure that the older one had overheard some of the fights. And he would yell at Sue. During those fights, when he would yell at Sue, trying to get her to see that she's an alcoholic and she needed help. She had been in and out of therapy since he'd met her, and he went with her to her current therapist to discuss the situation. There he learned that Sue was also struggling with an eating disorder. He and the therapist had exchanged emails as they worked together to get her into an inpatient treatment center that his insurance would cover. Ronnie was arrested, however, before Sue entered into any treatment. According to Ronnie, on the night of the big fight, the one that resulted in the order of protection, he was working on some bills at the dining room table. He heard the boys start to get louder with one another, arguing as they sometimes did over a video game. Their voices became more aggressive, and he wondered why Sue didn't intervene, as by this point, she usually would have. He walked over to that part of the house and was about to enter their older son's room, where the boys were playing Xbox, when he passed by their younger son's room. And there he saw Sue, slouched over the desk, hands sprawled out across the keyboard to the computer, drool running over her arm from where her mouth lay open. He entered the room and was hit with the smell of stale alcohol and mint toothpaste. He went towards her to jostle her awake, figuring he needed to get her into their bedroom before the children saw her like this. As he reached out to touch her, she startled awake. Wide-eyed, she stared at him, taking a moment to orient herself. She tried to stand up, and the chair slid out from under her and banged into the closet wall. She walked backwards away from him, but lost her bearing and began to trip over the chair. He reached out and grabbed her by both arms, trying to hold her up against the closet wall. "Sue," he shouted, "Sue, get a hold of yourself." Yes, he was yelling. Yes, he was disgusted. And yes, he was angry. That was when the boys walked in. So, this is the part of my job where I feel that my head is turning on its axis. I check my file, thinking, maybe I got these families mixed up, and this is not actually the husband of a woman that I'd interviewed a few days earlier. No. I look at this guy. He seems so mild-mannered and neat and so concerned about his children and his wife. But I think, drawing on my background, if all abusers looked the parts, my skills wouldn't really be needed, right? So I do my thing. So, I get the he said, I get the she said, a few different times, trying to flesh out their stories a little bit. I meet the children, get their story. I observe the children with each parent. I do some psychological testing, personality tests, and abuse potential inventories, and substance abuse questionnaires. I call what we call collateral contacts. I call pediatricians, therapists, teachers, visitation supervisor, friend of the mothers, friend of the fathers, neighbors, I review hospital records, medical records, psych records, court documents, police reports, and I figure out what's really going on. Or do I? I'm never really sure. I can tell you, in this case, every piece of information I obtained seemed to point in one direction or the other. So her current therapist told me, yes, she is an abused woman. Okay. Then his therapist, his current therapist, told me, my poor patient, he's just trying to get help for his wife, who's in denial about her substance abuse. And then this former therapist who'd seen them together, he tells me, yes, in fact, he was working with the father to get her into treatment for eating disorder and perhaps substance abuse. But for all he knew, she was an abused woman too. They're not mutually exclusive, you know. The children are quiet, they're mindful of their mother's fear, and the older one does remember that last frightening interaction he saw between them when he saw his father's hands on his mother and his mother's wide-eyed face. The neighbors, well, I think I've already established that they don't really know what's going on inside someone else's house. Often I'll go on home visits, trying to arrive during a typical daily activity such as dinner so that I can observe in a naturalistic setting. I guess in this case there were a few things that tipped my thinking more towards believing, ultimately, the father. First, there was a documented psychiatric history for the mother. It turns out she had been in a psychiatric hospital the year earlier, and her discharge summary indicated that she denied a history of alcoholism, which the mother did not deny that she had had early on in her life. In the second or third interview that I had with her, she said that she did not think it had been pertinent. That's why she hadn't disclosed this in the first interview. She also did have an eating disorder, but the hospital records showed that it was quite downplayed. She said she had no issues with abusing her painkillers. She had checked in to that hospital because she was depressed and suicidal. I got all of the records and I started reading more thoroughly, and there were various intakes by different providers. There was the medical providers, social worker, nutritionist, and I saw that there were different ways that this woman presented her story to different individuals and different professionals, I guess not thinking that it would all go together in one little integrated report at some point, or record. So to the nutritionist, she really did not disclose much about the eating disorder. To the medical doctor, she didn't disclose much about the painkillers. But as I read deeper and kind of cross-checked all of the data, it was pretty clear that this history was there and that she had some probably pretty serious personality issues, disorder going on that was not allowing her to present this all in one place. But I still had to wonder about the domestic violence in the house because, again, as I said, they're not mutually exclusive. But there was one story, as I dug deeper with her, that she told me about her own history that irked me. It became very significant the more I delved into it and explored it with her. It turned out that her father, who had died when she was a teen, he didn't die of natural causes. It turned out he had witnessed a neighbor who might have been involved with the mafia doing something he shouldn't be doing. And it turned out that the police had been involved, and that the police wanted her father to tell them what he knew. And it turned out that her father had hid inside their house for weeks and weeks in the dark, not going out for work or air, until finally he thought it had all died down. He went to work one day, and he never came home. Gone. And it turned out this became a big deal. and it was in the news, and her family was portrayed in a TV movie, and there were always many, many unanswered questions. And she lived for the rest of her teenage years always looking over her shoulder, always afraid, until she'd met Ronnie. Then she finally felt safe and happy, until she wasn't, until she didn't. In the end, I could not find any corroborating data anywhere, aside from that one police report, which in the end is a he said, she said. Even the children's reports were not indicative. Other than that one instant, they did not report seeing or experiencing any domestic violence in the house. I could not find anything to corroborate her story of domestic violence. Now, this is the most difficult part about my job because, as I said, I started out on the victim side, and it's incredibly difficult for me to write up a story, write up a report where basically I'm not believing that someone is the victim of domestic violence. On the other hand, I also know, working in the field of child custody, that this is unfortunately often something that gets put out there by the mothers, and it really does bother me, having worked with victims. It bothers me very much, because if one woman lies, it ruins it for the actual victims. So in the end, though, I did write my report up in the way that the father was validated. I said, to be safe, that the exchanges of the children should take place for a while at a safe place, or even a police precinct, just to be safe. I said he should have some anger management, continue therapy, so should the kids. But really, the mother needed intensive treatment for her substance abuse disorder, her eating disorder, and personality disorder. I thought, though, and I wrote about this, that she should maintain the custody of the children because she had been the primary caretaker all along, but that they should spend time with Dad. And Dad would be there to serve as a support and a backup if Mom needed to be out of the home or when she needed help. And that was it. Most of my cases do not go to trial. I never hear what happened after that. If they go to trial, I might hear. This one didn't. But as I started thinking about this family and preparing my talk to you today, I thought, maybe I should find out what happened with that case. So I called up the law guardian, who I had some other cases with. That's the children's lawyer. And I let him give me a quick rundown on what was going on. So here's what had happened. Apparently, after my report was handed in, a couple of months passed, and they were able to settle the case. It did not reach trial because with my report saying, look, you're not going to this and that, they were able to come to some agreement. The mother agreed to this and that. Okay. Approximately 10 days to 2 weeks after that was signed off on, the mother was driving while impaired. Apparently she had an accident, and she was put in jail for a period of time. Custody got switched to the father. The mother got treatment. The father did apparently get remarried even. And more recently, now, the children are now in high school. The kids are now choosing to go back and forth a little bit more between the parents. But no violence against these children ever occurred, as far as anyone knows. Thank you.